So since we're on the set of Antigone, I figured what better way to start this talk than with the Greek myth, because I loved Greek mythology when I was a kid. Now, I don't know if you guys remember the myth of Tantalus. Now, Tantalus, son of Zeus, was very naughty. He decided that he wanted to give the gift of ambrosia to tell mortals about it, and the gods didn't like that, so he incurred their wrath. So what they did is they submerged him up to the neck in water and that he could not drink. And he would reach over and try to grab the water, and it would get away. And above his head, there was fruit, and it was sumptuous and glorious. And when he reached to try to get it, the wind would carry the branches away, and he couldn't eat it. And so when I was looking at news stories about the recent hurricanes in Haiti, and there were 4 in a row, there was Faye, and then Gustav, and Hannah, and then Ike, I couldn't help think about this myth, because there was news stories coming in on ReliefWeb, which is a news aggregator for humanitarian and complex emergencies, that was telling about how you had these people who were surrounded by, ensconced by, besieged by water, and they couldn't drink it because it was dirty, it was muddy, it was filled with trash, or in some cases it had the decaying carcasses of animals. And what's really sad is even as the waters subside, even after all the reconstruction that is going to be done gets done, the torment and suffering that is akin to this myth of Tantalus is still there, because there are larger scale social forces that exist that keep people from just touching that fruit on the vine. And so these are 2 pictures that I took during my last visit in Haiti. And what's really somewhat surprising and a little bit upsetting are these 2 things are 3 miles apart. On your left, you have a Royal Caribbean cruise ship that comes to Labadie Beach on the coast of Haiti. Now, Royal Caribbean doesn't tell people that they're coming to Haiti right away. They tell them that they're coming to the island of Hispaniola. Now, Americans, being not so good about geography, don't realize that there's 2 choices. It's either the DR or it's Haiti. And you can find out once you get off the boat, but you don't necessarily know. And on the right is Chada, one of the largest slums in Cap Haitien. And there are 20 to 25 people living within a square mile. Now, before I tell you what the significance of these 2 photographs are for me and how it relates to the overall narrative arc that I'm trying to weave here, I want to give you a little backstory of what I used to do before I came to AIDG. Now, before I came and got started, I was doing my PhD in infectious disease epidemiology at Harvard School of Public Health. And I was doing some of my thesis work in Kenya. And at the time, I was still thinking, I might want to be a medical doctor. So I was talking to one of the doctors who I was working with on my research project, and I asked him if I could go on rounds with him because I was really interested in the international practice of medicine, particularly in resource-poor environments. And so, I went with him on the wards, and the clinic was reasonably well funded. They were getting money from the Wellcome Trust, from the Kenya Medical Research Institute, from the Medical Research Council, but still they didn't have enough money from all the people that were coming in. So people would come in from miles away, and some people walking a day to get there, and there's still not enough beds for all those kids. So a really common occurrence is that you'd have 2 to 3 kids sharing a bed. In the ICU, you'd also often have little ones that were in a coma because they had P. falciparum cerebral malaria. Or there's this one kid who was like, oh, he broke my heart. His name was Baraka, and he had Burkitt's lymphoma, which is a common type of lymphoma that's seen in Africa. And he had the characteristic swelling of the jaw that's grotesque, and he was such a sweet little kid. And they only had enough money at the clinic to reduce the swelling, and then you'd have to go home. So they wanted to reduce the swelling enough so he could eat again, but that kid was not going to make it. And what struck me and kind of freaked me out, I will let you know, is that I didn't lose an hour of sleep. I did not miss a single meal. Nothing about that experience really affected me. And yet, when I came here on this trip, we were dropping off some friends there because one of our friends' parents was coming in on the boat. And when we left, I burst into tears. The way when you're a kid and you're crying so much and you can't breathe? I'm like, what? What is it about this experience? Why is it that actual death in hospitals didn't have that kind of impact on me, but this did? Well, in Kenya, my friends who work in the hospital, they're Joe Normal, and they're doing everything in their power to make sure those kids survive. Now here in the case with Royal Caribbean, they give quite a bit of money to have the privilege to let people come on the beach. And a portion of that money goes to the Haitian government. Now the portion of that money that's supposed to go back from the capital to the city of Cap-Haïtien never gets there. So a big complaint that the mayors have is that they do not have the funds to deal with this problem. And so what is so upsetting is you have these people with so much power, and they have so much more impact on all these lives, and they do nothing. And it's the kind of human indifference in the face of suffering that, it's like a knife to the heart. So you may be wondering, okay, what does this doom and gloom story I'm telling you have to do with the work that I'm doing? Or this, again, the narrative tale. And so one thing it's hard is like, you have so much capital and so much opportunity for positive change, and it's like Tantalus, it's just out of reach. And so what does AIDG do? So AIDG stands for the Appropriate Infrastructure Development Group. And what we do is we start small businesses in developing countries that can get communities the kind of basic services that they need to improve their lives. So it's like we help Tantalus have a drink. And so the things that we focus on are renewable energy, sanitation, and clean water. Now back to this Tantalus myth. So my favorite teacher is my 11th grade English teacher, Mrs. Baumgartner. And she would say to me, like, if you're going to build a whole analogy about this, you have to make sure that everyone is clear about who the actors are. So who is Tantalus? Tantalus are the 4 billion people who live at the bottom of the pyramid, who live on under $4 a day. What's the water? The water is the better life, the better health, the better future for the children that people are just trying to reach for. And who are the gods inflicting punishment? Well, the gods are the larger scale social forces and the barriers to development that keep people mired in poverty. And so let's talk a little bit about these barriers. There's so many. We could be here all day. So I'm just going to talk about the few that I think AIDG can have an impact on. So one issue is that there is a lack of affordable products for the poor. And even when products do exist, sometimes they're not always getting to the people who need them the most. So this cool little doohickey was made in West Africa. It is a corn sheller, and it allows you to take an ear of corn and take all the kernels off without breaking them. It's $2. It's made from injected molded plastic, but it's not made in Guatemala where we work. And so the women we're working with in Guatemala are like taking off corn with their fingers and their thumbs. And it takes hours, and it's grueling and painstaking work. This thing would increase their efficiency 700%. It would save hours, days, weeks of time, but they just don't make it in Guatemala. Another issue is poor infrastructure. Now, if any of you have ever traveled in a developing country, you know those roads are bad. And oftentimes, especially if you're in a rural area, you'll know that, like, okay, the electrical grid is not so great, or maybe it's not reaching out to those rural and isolated communities, or the water infrastructure, well, there's no municipal water that's going to help you. But I want you to think back to the blackouts that happened in New York a couple of years back and how that shut down the city. And imagine what it's like trying to do business in that environment. In the town that we work with in Cap-Haïtien, sometimes you can have no power for like a month. And so think about trying to develop and get yourself to the next stage and build a sustainable future when you don't have that kind of access to basic services. The last one is a lack of locally produced alternatives. And so another issue is you're the little guy, and you want to go forward, you want to get better, and you try to get a product from overseas. Well, you have to deal with customs. And so if you have something simple like in Guatemala where we work, if you want to get just a Black & Decker drill, it costs you 4 times the price that you can get it at Home Depot here. And so there's another issue where there's no locally available products that people can use to solve their problems. And so where does AIDG fit in? Well, I like to think of us as what you would get if an international development engineering firm and a VC firm had a love child. So we are the very happy union of engineering R&D and patient capital coming together to create small businesses that can serve the needs of the poor. And so now I get to tell you a little bit about the R&D work that we're doing, and I get to brag about some of my colleagues. So this is really interesting. One of our colleagues, Sam Redfield, came up with this device. It is a hydroelectric system. It's made out of a bucket, PVC parts, a Toyota alternator that was turned into a generator, and a few other components. Now with this thing, you can charge 70 cell phones. And why this is particularly significant for the community that we were testing this in, so this is in La Florida in Guatemala. So their generator broke, and they were stuck. They had no electricity for a long time. And so they had to drive an hour away from their homes just to charge their cell phones. So if you think of a community in that situation, the introduction of this kind of technology is a game changer. Here as well, and this is really exciting to me. So this is our friend Sean Frayne, who won the Popular Mechanics Breakthrough Award last year for his invention of the wind belt. And we're working with him in Guatemala to do small-scale wind generation. And this is cool, because in terms of innovation, it's fabulous. So one of the issues with turbines are it's tough to get the nice little intersection between cheap, efficient, and would give you enough power. And yes. And so what he decided is like, well, what if we just flip it? Why don't we just not think about turbines at all? And since he was a little kid, he was really interested in Galloping Gertie. Do you guys know the Tacoma Narrows Bridge? Have you ever seen that video? So go to YouTube, go find this. It's amazing. So there's this bridge, it's the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, and it would gallop. There was something weird about the forces that were affecting this bridge, and it would gallop and dance. Until one day it broke. And so engineers spend a lot of time trying to get rid of that whole energy thing that's going on. And he's decided, what if you flip it? What if you use that energy, you use those forces to create energy? And so that's what he did. But the other interesting thing is, so he's working with us to create a large-scale version of this, but he has a small-scale version that could fit in quite nicely into a multi-billion-dollar industry. So by thinking about design for the rural poor, he could tap into that market. And so the problem he's solving he has a small one that's kind of this big. Well, what he's trying to do with that one is, there's an issue with smart buildings and the air vents, and they have sensors. Those sensors, you gotta change the batteries, and that costs a lot of money. If you had one of these things that could take advantage of the airflow in those sensors, problem solved. And you could save companies a lot of money in those smart buildings, and they'd be willing to spend a sizable chunk of change on that solution. But that solution came from him specifically thinking about wind generation for Haiti. All right, so design is just your first step. And if you have design and you don't have distribution, you have a paperweight. So the cornerstone of the work that we're trying to do is business incubation. So we want local business. We create local businesses using a local talent with the local materials to meet the needs of local communities to help them better their lives, but at a price that's affordable within the local economy. Ooh. So I'm going to finish up with the story of this community that we've worked with for several years now in Guatemala called Comunidad Nueva Alianza. They're amazing. I don't have time, unfortunately, to tell you their whole story, but hopefully I'll put on my Twitter the link to their website so you can get the full story of it's extraordinary. And so they're a worker-owned cooperative, and they are super organized, and they got a United Nations development grant to create a hydroelectric system on the community plantation so they could have electricity to their homes for the first time. Problem is, there wasn't a contractor who they could afford, and they were about to lose that grant. And then through serendipity as a power for good, we had just gotten to Guatemala. We had just started Shale Teco 2 months prior. We got that contract, and this is what Shale Teco did for them. Shale Teco made in Guatemala the Pelton turbines, the ballast load controllers, and if you're in New York City, you can see those in a couple weeks at the Wired store. They'll be on display. The manifolds and penstock, all Guatemalan labor, all in Guatemala. They put in the electric cables and installed the meters. And so the work that we have been able to do is to help communities who are on a way to wanting to build a sustainable future get there. And so in closing, I want to read you a little statement that I wrote. And so I wanted to get this right, so I wrote it down. So if we can move from microfinance into mid-scale investment, beyond just training, and into job creation, away from importing solutions and into developing solutions that work locally, the tremendous human capital can solve the problems of poverty within their own countries and within their own economies. And in this way, we could hand Tantalus a cup.